Thank you, Christina, and thanks for that clarity. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm really excited to be able to share about my culture and about the community in which I am blessed to serve. So let's get into it because I do want to get to your questions, and we will talk a little bit about the handout that I've created to help you out as well, but we'll get to that near the end. So first, I want to begin with honoring my family, my lineage, the Woptaga and Chips lineage. You can see my brother and my grandmother, my Tiblo and my Unshi on the screen, and the names of those who have walked on, who I am grateful to have learned from and with and lived with, as well as their ancestors and descendants. I'm also offering a little bit of what we would typically call a land acknowledgement, but I'm doing it my own way in a specific reason. You've often seen land acknowledgements used across the country in recent years because of national conferences and different things, theoretically to elevate the aspect that these lands were first inhabited by the indigenous peoples. We've been here for well over 40,000 years. But acknowledging them, what time frame are you choosing? So we are still here. And you could acknowledge tribal peoples based in a time frame in the 1600s, a time frame in the 1400s. So I've chosen to acknowledge our peoples in the time frame when European settlement grew rather rapidly here in Michigan. So I'm honoring the Three Fires Confederation and the Miami Sauk and Fox, Kickapoo, Lakota, and Wyandot, as well as many more tribal peoples. It is always best to speak of our ancestors who brought us to this place, who honor us with their teachings and their knowledge, and I want to specifically point that out. So a little bit of facts and information for those of you that aren't so familiar with us, and I'm not going to read all of these, of course. You can glance through them at your leisure, but to identify that there are at least 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States, many more in process of trying to receive that recognition, as well as many, many more who are trying to achieve state recognition. It's a very long and difficult process involving archaeologists, anthropologists, historians, genealogists, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to acknowledge the fact that there are hundreds and hundreds of tribal groups, families, lineages, and peoples around the United States, 12 tribes specifically here in Michigan. So I also want to point out to you some dichotomies that we live with here in the modern United States, which is that we are often called by names that are not the names for ourselves. So my heritage, my lineage is Lakota. Lakota is our word for ourselves, which means friend or ally. We were given the name of Sioux by the colonial settlers, the invaders, and they took that name from other indigenous peoples. Some believe that it came from the Iroquois. Nonetheless, it's important to know that there are dual ways to represent us. We prefer the words that represent us in our own language, of course. And of course, in my case, I prefer that you just call me Judy. But if you're going to refer to me as a Native woman, I prefer to be identified as Oglala Lakota because my closest family lives currently on the Pine Ridge Reservation, although I do have family also on the Rosebud. Also, from my present physical depiction, you can tell that I'm white facing or white presenting. I am a biracial person, notably Northern Europeans and Indigenous people. So with that said, let's move on. Paying attention to the fact that there are many, many, many negative impacts to Indigenous peoples over the years and over the centuries. I'm just going to point out this minor, albeit there could be an extensive list of the various massacres, forced marches, relocations, all of the things that happened to our peoples in the past and actually continue to happen in the present day because of the various treaties that have never been enforced. They have been broken almost from the beginning, lands taken away. So many people, when they do a land acknowledgement, will speak to the unceded and stolen lands of various people. I'll refer you to this list of the various massacres on Wikipedia, but a lot of people talk about the Trail of Tears, a notable forced march, but know that there were forced marches in virtually all of the tribes or some sort of forced relocation based in the laws and statements of presidents such as James Monroe and Andrew Jackson, who forced some of that to happen. There are many books about all of these forced experiences, the walks, the various relocations, but without getting into tribal details, I'll leave it at that. The realities of Native life originate from the multi-generational trauma that has occurred from not only those massacres, forced walks and relocations, but also the massive slaughter of bison at the hands of the European invaders on trains that went across the Plain States, trying to remove our chief food source and our spiritual connection to the Buffalo Nation. Our spiritual traditions were made illegal to the point that even elders who were labeled as our sacred leaders, or what in the vernacular is called medicine men, they were determined to be, quote, insane and put in mental institutions. We continue to this day, and as recently as the COVID-19 infections, with little or no supportive medical care and help when these kinds of huge pandemics happen. You maybe were lucky enough to see the rare news report about the fact that the Navajo Nation was trying to deal with a pandemic without running water. They have been dealing without running water for a very long time. The obesity and diabetes epidemic that our peoples are dealing with also is a reflection of the commodities or the, quote, food that is given to our people theoretically as a benefit to us from the federal government, but it has caused obesity to the extent that diabetes is rampant in our communities. Unfortunately, I am one of those, as is my mother and was my grandmother. The reservations on which some of our people live are bad housing, unsafe often with black mold, et cetera, et cetera. Thankfully, many of us live in urban centers like me and the region here around Detroit, Mount Pleasant, up in the Upper Peninsula, et cetera. There is also the recent revelations that have been on TV, notably noticed first in the Canadian government, but it is certainly a very big phenomenon here in the United States, the church-run boarding schools where Native children were supposedly being assimilated into white culture by cutting their hair and causing punishment when they tried to speak their native language. All of these things and more cause multi-generational trauma that continues to resonate through our lives and causes us to have a number of really negative reactions when we're dealing with the dominant culture. So let's get into some of the myths and the misnomers. I'm going to only talk from the tip of the iceberg because there is far too many to go into in this short amount of time. But these four I'd like to address just because they're very frequently offered and said in ways that is really, really important to me to address. So let's go through them one by one. So from the standpoint of wording, there are lots of ways that people will say, oh, my great-great-grandmother was an Indian princess, or, oh, there's this warrior in our family. And I hear that because I'm a genealogist, and I'll often have people reach out to me like, hey, can you help me find my Indian princess? Well, number one, these terms, and especially the one princess, probably reflects the invasion of peoples from countries that were dominantly monarchies. So when the invading white people encountered our indigenous people on either of the coasts initially, but certainly the East Coast we often talk about, they would meet our elders, our leaders, who more often than not would send the male leaders. Many of our societies are matriarchal, but men meet with men, women meet with women. And so the men were sent to meet with the males from Europe that were coming to the land. And so for whatever reason, they were labeled as chief and or warriors, and reflecting some certainly huge misunderstanding of our structures and roles. But then the daughters of these men were referred to as princesses. I don't know why they didn't refer to our chiefs or our leaders as kings, but for whatever reason, yes, we all know it's racism. But nonetheless, the idea that the girls were designated as Indian princesses, very racist term, and causes a lot of consternation among those of us that do genealogy research, but also doesn't acknowledge that, there's some tribal understanding that has to come, and about the aspects of chiefs are very important people. Sometimes it's hereditary roles. Many times it's based on voting within the tribe. We are the foundation of the dominant democracy within the United States. If you haven't heard of the Iroquois Confederacy and the ways that they operated themselves, that's where that arises from. But it does, when it's said, doesn't reference the fact that that's where all of this misnomer comes from and these myths about Indian princesses. And then also, why is it always that we're referencing, I have an Indian princess in my ancestry? Why is it never men? Kind of interesting. So the aspect also of invisibility comes up. Many times people will say, well, there aren't Native people around anymore. Oh no, we are still around. We represent at least 2.9% of the overall United States population based on the 2020 census. And there is expected to be more because of miscounting and avoidance of certain areas in population statistics. It's a long story that I won't go into, but the whole aspects of health disparities are greatest among Native people. I already mentioned that COVID-19 ramifications in the Navajo Nation. However, we experienced per capita the highest infections rates across the country. But when you see graphics in the media, you mostly don't see us referenced at all. Population statistics, taxation, and benefits are often ignored when talking about our people. I can't tell you how many diagrams, economic studies, land use studies, et cetera, will have graphics that show other ethnic and racial groups, but notably don't have our people at all. I did see one actually economic data that compared Indigenous people with immigrants. Very, very upsetting to see that, I have to say. Another aspect of these myths that happen is that the sports mascots of various sports teams, football, baseball, basketball, etc., are honoring Native people because they're using mascots and names that represent our tribal peoples. No, it is not flattering. No, it is usually depictions of angry faces, blood. Certainly the Washington team changed its name, which is totally offensive as a name, the former name. But the costuming that happens of mascots is so stereotypically wrong the rituals of riding a horse out the center of a football field and shoving a staff in the center of the field at the 50-yard line is so off, so wrong for all of us. The imagery that's used on, the hats and the logos and things like that are stereotypical depictions of our people, not only stereotypical, but many times very ugly. Just as an example of some of that, look at these images. So I did find this. I was trying to find an older image from back in the 1970s when I first got sort of activism motivated, I guess, or became an advocate. And a lot of the images of what would happen in the United States if somebody talked about a sports team that was the New York Jews, or, from instead of the Atlanta Braves, what if they were the Atlanta, some kind of blackface thing. So, the country rises up when it's based in some other very stereotypical racial groups. But why not obliterate these ones that are still in the culture? Now, the one in the upper left, thankfully, is gone now, but it exists in schools, it exists in high schools, it exists in colleges. So a very, very, very big problem. The mascots are just an abhorrent part of the current culture, and we have to fight really hard. Notably, the fact that the Washington team didn't change after decades of protests by our people. They didn't change until FedEx said, we're going to withdraw our money unless you change. Interesting, right? Let's go on to another myth. My DNA says that I'm Indian, so I do a lot of work in doing research in genealogy, of course. And DNA is the big hot button. You've seen probably the little ads from Ancestry and others with the little green leaves and all of that. And a lot of people go after those DNA testings because they've heard these myths of a native ancestor, that classic Indian princess, of course, as part of their DNA. Well, then either it comes back and says that they're Indian, and it may only be 2%. But on the other hand, that doesn't make you Indian. You're not involved in our heritage. You haven't learned about our culture. You haven't been involved with our families, our spirituality, et cetera, et cetera. And why is it that everybody taking a DNA test is so excited about finding Indian ancestry and not as respectful and engaging about having Asian ancestry or sub-Saharan African, et cetera, et cetera? It's really important to honor who our ancestors were and to acknowledge and learn from them. But on the other hand, how much of this is cultural appropriation and the aspect of what we call wannabes who want to be Indian for whatever reasons because they think it's romantic or exotic in some way. We are not. We're modern people having modern lives, and it's offensive. So let's talk now about some of the common misnomers that I recognize far too often. And unfortunately, I think I'm referencing this DNA one again, but let's go forward. So, went too far. So I'm going to not go through individual slides for these, but there's very many more of these misnomers. So lots of people I've heard say and do say in emails, well, I'm at the bottom of the totem pole, so I don't know. Well, okay, two things. So you don't know, he's not telling you. That might be a clue about something. On the other hand, the bottom of a totem pole are marvelous relatives out on the West Coast who construct these massive, beautiful, artistic, and creative structures. The bottom of those structures represents the foundations of their families, the foundations of their origin. It is a very important position. So this statement is inherently confusing because if you are part of the foundational and important part of the ancestral family, why wouldn't you know something? So this is confusing. Let's powwow about that. Oh my God, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that in very ugly situations. Our powwows are actively part of our culture. They are part of helping us to retain our heritage, our stories, our life ways, our foods, our dance, our music, the beauty of our regalia, but it's not a costume. It is called regalia. Powwows are a celebration of all of who we are, and it is a time of spiritual engagement, cultural engagement, social interaction between and among many different tribal groups. It is often the way that our girls meet our young men. It is a safe environment that is protected. Our young children can safely run about. Part of the joy of going to a powwow, if you've never been, is to watch what we call the tiny tots who go out and try and dance. And they literally are bouncing to the beat of the drum in absolutely precious ways. But let's powwow about that means let's have a meeting about that. Powwows are far beyond meetings. They encompass cultural and spiritual and more values than a simple meeting. The other reference, there's too many chiefs and not enough Indians. Well, if you meant to say that there's too many people acting like they want to be leaders and not enough people acting like they want to be followers, then say that. But why are you saying it this way? Not only is it offensive to us, again, you don't understand that the importance of and the responsibility of our leaders in our communities, that what translates to the word chief and often doesn't translate that way. We have other words for them. They could be honorary positions, they could be elected positions, but all of them represent a level of responsibility and moral and ethical values that we want to acknowledge. So to say this statement again misunderstands our culture in so many ways. I've already addressed the one about the DNA, so I'll skip that. But there are other ones, like, have you heard the phrase, oh, it's time to circle the wagons? Also, not a good phrase, right? It references those really difficult times when the European invasion was encountering our indigenous peoples wherever, and the ensuing conflict that happened, the fear on both sides. So certainly for those of us who were already here and our country being invaded, we're trying to defend and save our families, our food sources, etc. And then these people show up with wagons and all their equipment and digging in the earth to dig after gold and all of that sort of thing. So circling the wagons was a defensive posture. So also, offensive. When somebody says it's time to circle the wagons, don't you really mean it's time for us to be together as a team and figure this out? Like, why can't you just say it that way? Another thing that people will say a lot, oh, someone has to hold down the fort. Well, they often mean that somebody has to staff the office. We have to have this office open in spite of COVID, in spite of whatever else is going on. Could you just say that? Because someone having to hold down the fort also references that older, very, very conflicted history that we had, going out on the prairies, the invaders coming out, forts being set up, defensive postures created. And then finally, another reference that's often that I've heard recently, somebody's gone off reservation. Well, so the reference is to somebody's gone rogue. But behind that is a very, very deep and troubling lack of understanding. Native people, when they were forced into what we call the reservation structures, they were forced and contained sort of like prison camps, or as the Nazis did it in the concentration camps, or as we did here in the US with Japanese people during the war, it was not allowing people free movement. Native people on the reservation in intervals of that history had to ask for, apply for permission to get a pass to leave. And that might have been to go and see distant relatives. It might have been to perhaps if they were given the opportunity to go hunting. But going off reservation is a reference to that time when somebody actually goes rogue. So why not just say that instead of making it so, blatant against us? There are many words that are very offensive, some of which I won't even speak, and I've put them, at least one of them, on the next slide, so that that while I'm not speaking it, it's very offensive. So the top word, SQAW, is actually by the Secretary of the Interior, who is a Native woman herself. She has commissioned a whole group of people who are going around the United States, hopefully obliterating this word from the geography of the United States. There are rivers, mountains, streams, ski areas, etc., named with this word. It is a nasty word originating from I've heard different tribal groups that originated this word, but it actually speaks to a woman's genitalia. And it's disgusting. So don't ever use that word, please. Don't ever also use the word that was once associated with the Washington NFL football team. That also represents the awful manifestation of the European invaders paying other native tribal peoples to go and scalp other native people to prove that they killed them. And by showing that scalp lock, that piece of skin with the blood and all of that, was what that name originated from. It is totally inoffensive. I won't even say it. Also referring to our men in derogatory terms by, and there actually was a commercial on TV that I think was one of those car companies that you can buy a car online. I actually wrote a letter to them because a young man who stereotypically looks native, dark hair, dark eyes, darker skin, all of that, the woman in the commercial actually refers to him as, well, Chief, you're buying this car, something like that. I actually wrote a letter to the company, and while I didn't see that commercial for a while, occasionally late at night, it still pops up, and it's very offensive. There is also the offensive terminology of, well, how much Indian are you anyway? And I get that because I am presenting or white-faced and indigenous, and a lot of people will reference that, referencing the government-imposed, the federal government-imposed blood quantum identification that is used to determine who gets benefits and who doesn't. We oppose it. We don't like it. If we're Native, we're connected to our families, we're practicing the spirituality, we're involved culturally, et cetera, we don't like that designation. But it is a designation of the federal government to determine that after a certain point, you don't get benefits anymore, even if you are part of our family, even if you are part of our spiritual community, even if you are still living on the lands of your ancestors. Many people will ask, well, how much Indian are you anyway? As if I'm going to lop off, well, if I'm a quarter, I guess that means this arm is part of me, that Indian, I don't know. And then there's the very offensive phrase of, well, what's your real name? As if the name that I'm using, Judy Naimerman, is not as real as my Lakota name. Do I want to share my Lakota name with somebody that asked me that question? No, I do not. Let's move on. So there are also other things to not do, please. So the classic Halloween costumes, racist in any form, adult or children. You do have here at Oakland Community College another lecture coming up later in the month about the myth of Thanksgiving with the Pilgrims and the Indians please help your children to not dress in those classically awful and racist forms of pilgrims and Indians meeting over a meal. Very classically racist. Then there's also the, oh yeah, you must be Indian because I can see those high cheekbones. Again, stereotyping physical characteristics such as hair color and eye shape. That never works in any culture, but it's used very often with us. So certainly I've heard it. Other of my family has heard it. Most people don't realize that, for instance, a whole bunch of us might have ancestry that is in the Seneca Nation, and they have a high percentage of people with red hair. It is believed that one of our Lakota very heroic leaders in the past, Crazy Horse, that he had curly hair and that it was actually lighter than the stereotypical black or dark brown that people talk about. Then there's also the buying those stupid little teepees for kids to put up in the living room or the family room to play in or the backyard. And then the sale of sage wands or talking to people about what totem animal they have or what kind of Indian medicine they're taking, et cetera, et cetera. Cultural appropriation takes many, many forms. And I'm asking you and begging you, please do not use your money to buy or condone those things. Very harmful. So what can you all do to help to create some change? So my grandma always said, we have 2 eyes and 2 ears and 1 mouth. When she would say that, what she meant was, in effect, bluntly, shut up and listen and watch. So a lot of what I am encouraging you to think about is how you might learn not only from us and with us, but listen to what we're saying, elevate our voices in ways that will help the broader community to understand issues. I've put here on the screen a couple of articles that you can Google. That the first one I wrote, it's a genealogy focused article, but it appears on the website of Family Tree Magazine, the do's and don'ts of respectful Native American research. So it guides genealogists who are hoping to help their clients or even themselves find if they have Native ancestry, legitimately. The other one is an article that appears from, I believe it's called vice.com, 100 Ways to Support and Not Appropriate from Native People. I hope that that might be something that you might look into. There are a lot of ways that people can understand new ways of acting and respecting not only our cultures, but engaging with us in good and healthy ways. And then certainly, be friends with us. Find out about Native centers in your area. So some of you are, hopefully, those of you from Oakland Community College's network and here in Michigan, we have 3 that are right here in Southeast Michigan, very close by where we all live. The Southeast Michigan Indians is in Centerline on the east side of Macomb County. American Indian Health and Family Services is on Lawndale down in Detroit. And we also have the North American Indian Association here in Southeast Michigan. It's headquartered in Redford. There are, again, like I said, 12 tribes represented here across Michigan, and making friends with all of us, learning from all of us, attending our events. You can sign up for newsletters and come and actually learn from us. So don't tell us what you think you already know. Remember that admonition. You have 2 eyes and 2 ears and 1 mouth. So join in, but listen first. So takeaways. I hope that what you can do, what you can help with, how you can change not only your actions, but help to lead others to correct action. I hope that you'll seek out our Native centers and those of us who would happily be friends with you. I've shared with Christina a handout that references some sort of beginner books, if you will, that have a lot of references in them that you might be able to utilize to study more deeply. all of the universities around Michigan have a variety of courses with Native professors teaching about Native culture and maybe even Native languages. I certainly would encourage you to purchase from Native businesses. Any and all of that information can be obtained from easily Googling some of that. And then we ask you to be an ally with us. We ask you to be an activist in challenging people when they say something like these phrases that I mentioned, and stop the misinformation about our cultures and stop the negative behaviors and depictions of all of us in the ways that the dominant culture often does, thinking that none of us are around to hear it or to stop it. So I'll ask you to be an advocate with and for us as a friend, and try and help us to broach some of these discussions in ways that are not only respectful, but are based in facts. So in the handout that I've provided, I've given some really, really good books that I've often referred white people to help them get started. A key one is a book from the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian that is called Do All Indians Live in Teepees? And oh, by the way, we don't. But anyway, there's a couple of books on that list, and all of them have footnotes and bibliographies and other things that might be of help to you. So I'm hoping that we can get to some conversation now and have some Q&A time so that we can actually have a discussion instead of me just talking at you. So I've put up on the screen my email address if any of you want to reach out afterwards. But with that, I'll stop sharing. And Christina, I'm more than happy to have you take it on for me.
Thank you, Judy. That was a lot of great information to help guide us as we become more culturally competent and responsible.